My dad was a very detailed and organized man, and we knew that he saved a lot of things, but we weren't aware of just how much he saved until he died. And as we were going through things, we found like the pair of socks that he graduated from high school in. And we thought, that's a strange thing to save, until we discovered that, there were 5 boys in his family, and they were farmers. And so when they got to 8th grade, their dad gave them the option of either going on with their education or stopping so that they could help with farming. And my dad was the only one of those 5 boys who chose to receive that high school diploma. And so he saved those socks as a sign of not only how proud he was, but that he wanted to continue on with his education. He also saved a number of little notebooks. One set had every dime he had ever earned from the age of 9 on, and every dime he had ever spent. Another set of books, my dad was a car salesman, and so another set of books contained the name of a person, the make and model of the car they bought, what color the interior was, what color the exterior was. And I don't ever remember anybody calling the house and saying, "Joe, when I bought that car 20 years ago, what color was the interior?" But he saved them. He saved them. And I think maybe he saved them as a reminder to himself that he was providing for his family. Anyway, there were a couple of things that he had saved that really came to mean a lot to us. Anytime we gave my dad a birthday card, a Father's Day card, or any kind of a note, he saved it. Not only did he save it, but he would write a little notation in it. And so I have kept a few of those. One was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. It was about a week before Christmas. We were all in the living room, and we had the old Philco radio and record player, and the front was open, and my dad's favorite 78, White Christmas, was playing. And I had a tennis ball, and I was throwing it around the living room. And of course they said, "Don't throw the ball in the house." I didn't quite listen. I threw the ball, and wouldn't you know, it bounced off the record and broke it in half. So I was sent upstairs. My dad was pretty angry. And when I went upstairs, I wrote this little note. "Dear Father." I never called him Father unless I knew I was really in trouble. "Dear Father, I am sorry I broke your record. Here is 5 cents to buy another one." And I had taped a nickel on there. "Please, love, Marla. Please do not give the 5 cents back." The 5 cents was still on that note. And on that note, my dad had written, "This brings a tear to a father's eyes. How could I not forgive her?" Another one that I have saved, I wrote when I was in college, and it was after a time when I was growing up, when I forgot about the importance of family, and I forgot about just how much my mom and dad knew. And so I was writing this apology letter to them. And at the bottom of that one, my dad had said, "This stirs a father's heart. How could I not forgive her?" Friends, that is the message of our readings today, that God continually forgives us and invites us to look at one another and say, "How could I not forgive them? How could I not forgive you?" In fact, in Sirach, he's very blunt about it, and he says, if you don't forgive others, how can you expect God's mercy yourself? We forgive because we are so grateful that God has forgiven us. In the gospel, Jesus begins by saying, I don't ask you to forgive 7 times, but 70 times 7. And we know that in Scripture, numbers are symbolic. So 7 is the fullness of God, Father, Son, and Spirit, plus the fullness of humanity, the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 elements of the earth, meshing together so that God and humanity become one, that we are called to live as the face of God. But Jesus doesn't stop with 7. He says 70 times 7, each and every time, always, always. Then he goes on to share a parable about a king who calls a servant in who owes him a large amount of money. And he says, "I want you to pay me now." But the servant says, "I don't have the money. Please be patient with me." And the king has already threatened to sell him and to sell everything he owns. But as soon as the servant says, "Please be patient with me," the king is moved with compassion. and he forgives everything he owes. That servant goes out to another servant who owes him very little, and he says, pay up. I want what you owe me. And again, that servant says, but I don't have it. Please be patient with me. And instead of sharing that same forgiveness, that same mercy that he had been shown, he throws him in jail. And of course, Jesus, in telling the story, reminds us that we need to forgive because we are so forgiven. And so, friends, as we listen to these readings, as we look at our own lives, I'm sure each one of us can be aware of those times when we know that God has forgiven us. Maybe for small things, maybe for large things, but that we can hear that voice of God saying to each one of us, how could I not forgive you? How could I not forgive you? There also might be those times in our lives when we need to forgive ourselves because God has forgiven us. And that can be difficult at times. But I remember a friend of mine once telling me, God always forgives you. And if you can't forgive yourself, in some ways you're setting yourself up as a higher tribune than God is. We need to look at ourselves and to say, how could I not forgive myself because God has forgiven me? And of course, most importantly of all, to look at others. And regardless of how we think they have offended us, regardless of whether or not they even apologize to us, at all times, with every person in every way, to look at our brothers and sisters and say, because I have been so forgiven, how could I not forgive you? And if we become those examples of forgiveness, those examples of God's mercy and love, we know that we will be strengthened as disciples, that we will be those people for whom it is easy to say, the Lord has forgiven me, and so I always forgive you as well.